isn't that the way? Everybody got the dues and I the pay.
At 77 years old, Steven Tyler is not just another rock star nearing the twilight of his career. He is a man who has lived through the chaos of fame, battled demons that nearly destroyed him, and endured heartbreaking struggles that few fans ever saw. For decades, his raspy voice and wild stage presence defined Aerosmith, making him one of the most recognizable frontmen in rock history. But now, in his late 70s, the story of Steven Tyler has taken a turn that no one expected, one that is as inspiring as it is tragic. Tyler's life was always larger than life itself. He embodied rock and roll excess, with his scarves, screams, and untamed energy, but behind the glitter and the spotlight, his health and personal battles were quietly breaking him down. From decades of substance abuse to devastating injuries, and even shocking revelations from those closest to him, the man once known as the Demon of Screamin' is now confronting the most fragile chapter of his life. Recently, even his daughter Mia revealed a haunting truth, that the iconic scarves he draped over his microphone weren't just for show. They were sometimes used to conceal pills, giving him access to substances while he performed in front of thousands. It was a revelation that shook fans, adding another layer of heartbreak to the story of a legend who seemed unstoppable on stage, but was quietly collapsing off it. And as if that weren't enough, Tyler has also faced the cruel reality of time itself. His voice, the very thing that made him a star, has been scarred by injuries, forcing Aerosmith to cancel tours and putting an abrupt halt to his lifelong love of performing. For a man whose identity is inseparable from the stage, losing his voice has been nothing short of devastating. Yet, even in the face of tragedy, Tyler continues to fight, teaming up with younger artists like Youngblood. He refuses to fade quietly, showing the world that his passion for music still burns, even as his body tells a different story. The question now is simple but painful. How did one of rock's most iconic frontmen reach this heartbreaking point at 77, and what does his story reveal about the price of living like a legend? To answer that, we need to go back to where it all began, the rise of a boy from New York, who would grow into the voice of a generation. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Steven Tyler's story, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. There's so much more to uncover about the legends of music in Hollywood. Long before the scarves, the screams, and the stadiums filled with fans, Steven Tyler was just a kid from New York who dreamed of music. Born Steven Victor Tallarico in 1948, he grew up in a family where music was both escape and identity. His father was a classically trained pianist, and young Steven would often sit under the piano, absorbing melodies that would later inspire his unique approach to performance. But unlike the refined sound of his father, Tyler craved something raw, wild, and rebellious. Rock and roll was the answer. In the late 1960s, fate brought him together with Joe Perry and Tom Hamilton, and by 1970, Aerosmith was born. From the very beginning, the band stood out. Tyler's voice, high, raspy, and unrelenting, was unlike anything else on the radio. Combined with his flamboyant style and restless energy, he quickly became the centerpiece of the group. Audiences weren't just listening to Aerosmith, they were experiencing Steven Tyler. By the mid-70s, Aerosmith had exploded onto the rock scene with hits like Dream On, Sweet Emotion, and Walk This Way. These weren't just songs, they were anthems that captured the restlessness of a generation. Tyler's stage presence, with his signature scarves draped around the microphone stand and his wide-mouthed screams, cemented him as one of rock's most unforgettable frontmen. Critics compared him to Mick Jagger, but fans argued Tyler was wilder, edgier, and even more magnetic. Success, however, was a double-edged sword. With fame came fortune, and with fortune came temptation. The 1970s rock scene was a blur of drugs, alcohol, and excess, and Aerosmith embraced it all. Tyler, alongside Perry, dubbed the Toxic Twins, became notorious for their indulgence. What started as fun quickly spiraled into chaos. Behind the scenes, the band was often barely functioning, held together by their music and the loyalty of their fans. Yet despite the growing turbulence, Tyler's charisma never wavered. On stage, he was untouchable, screaming lyrics that felt like confessions, balancing the fine line between chaos and control. His voice carried the weight of someone who was already living on the edge, and that danger made him irresistible. By the end of the 70s, Aerosmith wasn't just a band, they were legends in the making, and Steven Tyler was their heart. But as the spotlight grew brighter, the shadows behind it deepened. Tyler's rise to fame was spectacular, but the same forces that lifted him up were the ones quietly preparing to tear him down. With fame came fortune, and with fortune came the shadows that nearly destroyed Steven Tyler. By the late 1970s, Tyler's life had spiraled into a haze of drugs, alcohol, and reckless living. Alongside Joe Perry, the pair became known as the Toxic Twins, a nickname that sounded glamorous to outsiders but carried a devastating truth. Behind the wild headlines and chaotic tours was a man consumed by addiction. Tyler has admitted openly that drugs ruled his life during Aerosmith's peak years. Cocaine, heroin, pills, nothing was off limits. He later revealed that he spent over $2 million on substances, a number that still shocks even the most hardened rock fans. For a man adored by millions, the reality was heartbreaking. His greatest high wasn't the roar of the crowd, but the haze of chemicals clouding his mind. The cost of this lifestyle was brutal. Tyler's health began to deteriorate, his relationships fractured, and Aerosmith itself teetered on collapse. Concerts were chaotic. Sometimes he could barely remember the words, other times he didn't even make it to the stage. Fans still screamed his name, but behind the lights Tyler was fading. His once powerful body was battered, his voice strained, and his spirit drained by addiction. In the 1980s, the band nearly fell apart. Joe Perry left, tensions soared, and Tyler's condition worsened. Friends and bandmates tried interventions, but addiction is rarely conquered easily. For Tyler, the breaking point came after a 1986 collapse during a tour. Finally forced to confront reality, he checked into rehab. It wasn't the last time, but it was a turning point. Tyler later admitted that without those interventions, he might not have lived to see the 1990s. Recovery was not immediate. Sobriety came in cycles, progress followed by relapse. Even decades later, Tyler confessed to struggles, including a relapse in 2022, after surgery on his foot led to painkiller dependence. Each time, the tragedy of his battle reminded fans that addiction is not something you beat once, but a lifelong fight. These struggles didn't just affect his health, they scarred his legacy. Tyler's flamboyant stage persona often hid the broken man behind it, but those closest to him knew the cost. His children grew up watching him wrestle with demons, and his bandmates often carried the weight of his choices. The rock star lifestyle that had made Aerosmith famous had nearly destroyed its own frontman. Even today, at 77, Tyler carries the marks of those years. His body is weaker, his voice damaged by decades of screaming and abuse. The addiction years may be behind him, but the scars remain, both physically and emotionally. For fans, it's heartbreaking to see a man who once seemed invincible admit that he barely survived his own fame. But if the world thought they had heard the worst, they were wrong, because revelations from within his own family would expose shocking truths about just how far Tyler's addiction once went. As if Steven Tyler's public struggles weren't already heartbreaking enough. One of the most shocking revelations came not from tabloids or reporters, but from inside his own family. His daughter Mia, now an adult and reflecting on her childhood, recently spoke out about what it was really like to grow up with a father who lived life on the edge of addiction. What she revealed painted a picture even darker than fans imagined. According to Mia, Tyler's signature scarves, the brightly colored flowing fabrics he famously tied around his microphone stand, weren't always just a fashion statement. She claimed that at times those scarves were used to hide pills, making it possible for him to slip them into his hand during concerts without the audience ever noticing. To fans, the scarves were part of the mystique, an iconic piece of rock and roll flair. To his daughter, they were a reminder of the painful reality. Her father's battle with substances followed him even on stage. The revelation stunned the music world. Tyler's scarves had become as legendary as his voice, but now they carried a heartbreaking association. For decades, fans thought the scarves symbolized his flamboyant energy and eccentric personality. Now they stood as a quiet testament to how addiction can infiltrate even the most glamorous aspects of fame. Mia's words weren't meant to tarnish her father's image, but to humanize him. She explained that growing up with Steven Tyler was both magical and heartbreaking. Magical because of his undeniable charisma, heartbreaking because she often saw the man behind the legend struggling with demons he couldn't control. Her honesty gave fans a rare glimpse into the cost of addiction on a family, not just on the star himself. For Tyler, hearing his own daughter speak so candidly about his past was a painful reminder that fame cannot erase the scars of those closest to you. Public scandals are one thing, but private pain, especially when it affects your children, is something much harder to bear. It reminded fans that behind every rock star is a family forced to live with the consequences. This revelation added yet another layer of tragedy to Tyler's story. The scarves that once symbolized glamour and excess now carried the weight of secrecy and survival. For many fans, it was the moment they realized just how deep his struggles went, and how even in the spotlight, Tyler was hiding truths too painful to admit. But the heartbreak didn't stop there. Even as he fought through the shadows of addiction, Tyler would face another devastating blow. losing the very thing that defined him, his voice. For Steven Tyler, his voice wasn't just his instrument, it was his identity. Nicknamed the Demon of Screamin', his high-pitched wails and gritty power became the sound that defined Aerosmith. But as the years went on, that legendary voice began to betray him. Decades of relentless touring, substance abuse, and the natural toll of age left his vocal cords scarred, and the damage was impossible to ignore. In recent years, Tyler has faced repeated vocal injuries that forced Aerosmith to cancel or postpone tours. For a band whose live shows were the heartbeat of their legacy, the cancellations were devastating. Fans who had waited years to see them perform were met with heartbreaking news. Tyler simply couldn't sing. Doctors diagnosed him with vocal cord damage severe enough to require rest and even surgery, but recovery at his age was uncertain. For a man who lived for the stage, being told he couldn't perform was like losing a part of his soul. Tyler admitted that his voice had become fragile, and singing the songs that once came effortlessly now required immense effort and risk. The very gift that made him famous had become the source of his greatest pain. The emotional toll was crushing. Tyler confessed that standing before thousands of fans and realizing he couldn't deliver the way he once did was humiliating. Each canceled show wasn't just a lost paycheck, it was a reminder that time was closing in. For Aerosmith, a band that had always thrived on its explosive live energy, the uncertainty of their frontman's voice left their future hanging by a thread. The tragedy of losing his voice cut deeper than any scandal or tabloid headline. Addiction could be fought, controversy could be outlived, but when the very tool that defined his artistry was taken away, it was a blow that nothing could replace. Fans described seeing him struggle through performances as both inspiring and heartbreaking, a legend refusing to quit even as his own body begged him to stop. For Tyler, the stage had always been home. Now, standing under the lights was a constant gamble. Could he still hit the notes? Would his voice crack? Each concert became a battle, and each battle left him weaker. And yet, even as his health faltered, Steven Tyler refused to walk away quietly. Because for him, music was more than a career, it was survival. And that determination would lead him to unexpected collaborations, and one last attempt to prove that his fire still burned. For most artists, losing their voice at 77 would mean the end. But Steven Tyler has never been one to surrender quietly. Even as his vocal injuries forced Aerosmith to cancel tours and left fans questioning whether they'd ever see him perform again, Tyler refused to accept silence as his fate. Instead, he turned toward Reinvention. One of the most surprising moves came with his collaboration with British rocker Youngblood. The two worked together on an EP titled One More Time, blending Tyler's decades of experience with Youngblood's youthful edge. For many fans, the partnership was unexpected. Tyler, a rock legend from the 70s, and Youngblood, a voice of a new generation. But that was exactly the point. Tyler wanted to show that he wasn't trapped in nostalgia. He could still be relevant, still innovate, still shock the world with something new. Even as critics doubted whether his voice could carry him, Tyler poured himself into recording. Every lyric became more than just a performance. It was a statement that despite the pain, despite the age, despite everything, he would not let his story end in silence. This wasn't the first time Tyler had sought reinvention. Back in 2016, he shocked fans by releasing a country music solo album, We're All Somebody from Somewhere. While the experiment divided listeners, it proved one thing. Tyler was fearless in chasing new sounds. To him, music was about exploration, not comfort zones. But there's a bitter sweetness to these efforts. For every new project, there's the lingering reality that his days on stage are limited. Recording with Youngblood may keep his legacy alive for a new generation, but fans who grew up with Aerosmith know they may never again hear him scream "Dream On" the way he once did. And that's the heartbreaking truth. Tyler's creativity is as fierce as ever, but his body no longer keeps pace. Every new release feels like both a triumph and a goodbye, a reminder that legends don't stop creating, even when time tries to stop them. But perhaps the most emotional part of Steven Tyler's story isn't in his projects or his battles. It's in the way he now reflects on his life at 77, with a mix of gratitude, regret, and wisdom that only someone who has truly lived can share. At 77, Steven Tyler is no longer the untamed wild man leaping across stages with boundless energy. Instead, he is a man looking back on a life filled with extremes, moments of euphoric success, and moments of devastating collapse. In his own words, he knows he has lived 100 lifetimes in one. That reflection is both his pride and his burden. Tyler has spoken openly about regret, particularly the years lost to addiction. He admits that drugs and alcohol stole irreplaceable moments, not just from his career, but from his family. He has said that his children often paid the highest price watching their father battle demons when they deserved stability. At 77, he doesn't sugarcoat those truths. Instead, he confronts them with honesty, a rare humility for someone who once seemed larger than life. And yet, Tyler is also filled with gratitude. He often reminds fans that he never expected to live this long, much less still be making music. For a man who once teetered on the edge of destruction, every day is a gift. He credits his survival not only to rehab and recovery, but also to the unwavering loyalty of Aerosmith fans, who stood by him through scandals, relapses, and cancellations. Still, the reflection carries sadness. Tyler knows that his body can no longer do what it once did. His voice, though iconic, is fragile. The stage that was once his kingdom is now a battlefield where victory is never guaranteed. He acknowledges this with a mix of acceptance and defiance. Acceptance that time cannot be stopped. Defiance that he won't let it silence him completely. What makes his reflections so powerful is the wisdom behind them. Tyler doesn't speak like a man bitter about what he's lost. Instead, he speaks like someone who understands that life, with all its chaos, is worth every second. His story, tragic and triumphant, is a reminder that even legends are human, that behind the scarves and screams is a man who fought, lost, and kept fighting. And as fans watch him at 77, the question that lingers is one that cuts deep. Will Steven Tyler ultimately be remembered for his voice that shook the world, or for the tragedies that nearly took it away? Steven Tyler's story at 77 is both inspiring and heartbreaking. He lived the dream of millions, fronting one of the greatest rock bands in history, screaming anthems that became the soundtrack of generations. But he also lived the nightmare, fighting addiction, losing his health, and watching the very gift that defined him begin to fade. The tragedy of his journey is not just in what he lost, but in how much he had to sacrifice to keep going. The scarves, the screams, the wild energy, all of it came with a price. His daughter's revelations, the canceled tours, the broken moments behind the spotlight, they remind us that even legends carry scars the world rarely sees. And yet Steven Tyler refuses to be defined by tragedy alone. His collaborations with younger artists, his constant push to create, and his willingness to reflect with honesty, all show a man who still burns with passion. At 77, he is proof that life is never a straight line. It's messy, painful, beautiful, and fleeting. For fans, his story is a reminder to look past the legend and see the human being. A man who soared to unimaginable heights, crashed into the lowest valleys, and somehow found the strength to keep climbing. His legacy is not just his music, it's his resilience, his raw humanity, and the lessons his life leaves behind. Steven Tyler may not hit the same notes he once did, but his story still resonates louder than ever. And as he faces the final chapters of his life, he leaves us with a question only time can answer. Will history remember him for the voice that defined rock and roll, or for the tragedy of the battles he fought behind the curtain? If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe, and turn on notifications. More untold stories of Hollywood and music legends are on the way, and you won't want to miss them.